The porcelain of the antique vase shattered against the marble floor, a sound as sharp and final as a closing door on a life you once knew. For Elara, 9 months pregnant, and on her knees, the sound was her future breaking apart. Her husband, the man who had vowed to protect her, stood over her, with eyes as cold as the raging storm outside. His mother pointed a diamond-ringed finger toward the door, her voice a blade of ice. "Get out! This family has no place for a barren charity case." Barren. But she was carrying his child. In that moment, drenched in rain and betrayal, she had nothing. Little did they know the very ground they stood on, the grand mansion they cherished more than family held a secret. And by the next sunrise, she wouldn't be begging to be let in. She'd be holding the keys to it all. The air in the Blackwood mansion was always heavy, thick with the scent of old money and unspoken resentments. For Elara, it had never felt like home. It was a museum in which she was a temporary and often unwelcome exhibit. Tonight, the air was electric, charged by the storm lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the grand drawing room and the fury brewing within its walls. Julian Blackwood, her husband of 2 years, looked every bit the master of the estate. His dark hair was perfectly coiffed, his bespoke suit uncreased, but his handsome face was twisted into a mask of cruel indifference. Standing beside him, a statue of matriarchal venom, was his mother, Beatrice Blackwood. Her silver hair was arranged in an immaculate chignon, and the formidable Blackwood diamonds at her throat seemed to wink in the firelight, mocking Elara's simple gold locket. The conflict had started over something trivial, a dropped serving dish during dinner with the Vances' potential business partners. But Elara knew it wasn't about the dish. It was never about the small things. It was about her background, her lack of a prestigious family name, her inability until now to provide the one thing Beatrice craved above all else, a legitimate heir. "Clumsy, worthless girl," Beatrice had hissed, her voice carrying across the cavernous dining hall. "You embarrass us. You embarrass the Blackwood name." Now, hours later, the argument had escalated into a full-blown tribunal. Isabella Vance, the daughter of their dinner guest, and Julian's colleague, was here too. She lounged on a velvet chaise, a smug, predatory smile playing on her perfectly glossed lips. She was everything Elara wasn't confident, sharp-tongued and dripping in designer labels. "Julian, darling, it's a matter of standards," Isabella said, her voice a silky purr. "How can your family be expected to close the merger with my father when your domestic situation is so unstable?" Elara clutched her swollen belly, a protective instinct warring with the tremor of fear that ran through her. "It was an accident," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the thunder. "Julian, please." Julian wouldn't look at her. He just stared at the fireplace, his jaw tight. "Mother is right, Elara. This isn't working. It hasn't been working for a long time." "What are you talking about?" A cold dread began to seep into her bones. "We're about to have a baby. Your baby." Beatrice let out a short, barking laugh. "Oh, we are well aware of the situation." She took a step forward, her eyes sweeping over Elara's pregnant form with utter disdain. "But you see, we've had some confirmations, some tests." Elara's brow furrowed in confusion. "Tests? What tests?" "Don't play dumb." Julian finally snapped, turning to face her. His eyes, once the source of her comfort, were now 2 chips of ice. "The doctors have been very clear. There are significant risks, potential defects. We cannot have the Blackwood line tainted." The lie was so audacious, so monstrous, that Elara couldn't even form a response. Her pregnancy had been perfect. Every checkup, every scan had shown a healthy, thriving baby. Dr. Evans had been glowing in her reports. This was a fabrication, a cruel weapon forged to break her. "That's not true," she cried, her voice cracking. "Dr. Evans said the baby is perfectly healthy." "You were there. Dr. Evans is a sentimental fool," Beatrice cut in. "We sought a second opinion from a more reputable source. A specialist. The bloodline must be protected, Elara. You of all people should understand the importance of legacy." It was then that Isabella stood up, gracefully gliding over to Julian's side. She placed a delicate hand on his arm, her expression a facsimile of concern. "Julian, my love, perhaps this is for the best. We can start fresh. A new, healthy family." She then looked at Elara, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "You see, Elara, I can give Julian the kind of heir this family deserves." The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Elara's world tilted on its axis. The late nights at the office, the scent of another woman's perfume on his clothes, the sudden coldness, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. You're having an affair," she gasped, looking at Julian. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. "It's more than an affair, Elara. It's a future. Isabella understands me. Her family understands our world. And the baby," Elara's hand trembled on her stomach. "Our baby." Beatrice stepped forward, her face a mask of finality. "That thing is your problem now, not ours." She pointed a long, bony finger at an antique Ming vase on a nearby pedestal, a piece she cherished. "You are as useless and fragile as that piece of pottery, a pretty decoration that serves no real purpose and breaks under the slightest pressure." To punctuate her point, she walked over, seized the vase, and hurled it to the floor. It exploded into 1,000 blue and white fragments. "This is what you are to us," Beatrice snarled, her voice rising to a fever pitch. "Broken, worthless, now get out of my house!" "No." Elara pleaded, tears streaming down her face as she sank to her knees among the shards. "Please don't do this. It's raining. I have nowhere to go. Think of your grandchild." Julian's face was unreadable, a stone facade. "My mother told you to leave." Two burly security guards, men who had always nodded politely to her, entered the room. They looked uncomfortable but resolute, their loyalty bought and paid for by Blackwood money. They took her by the arms, their grips firm but not yet brutal. "My things, my wallet, my phone," she stammered, the reality of the situation crashing down on her. "The staff will pack your personal effects. We will have them sent to a charity of our choosing," Beatrice said dismissively. "You came here with nothing, and you will leave with nothing." They dragged her through the grand foyer, past the sweeping staircase she had descended on her wedding day, her heart full of love and hope. The heavy oak doors were pulled open, revealing a wall of driving rain and howling wind. The cold night air hit her like a physical blow. With a final unceremonious shove, they pushed her out onto the stone portico. She stumbled, catching herself, just before she fell down the slick marble steps. Her thin silk dress was instantly soaked, clinging to her skin. The heavy doors boomed shut behind her, the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place, echoing her complete and utter banishment. She stood there for a moment, stunned into silence. The cold rain, plastering her hair to her face and mixing with her hot tears. The imposing facade of Blackwood Manor loomed behind her, its windows glowing with a warm, golden light, a warmth she was now forever shut out from. She was 9 months pregnant, penniless, and alone, cast out into a storm with nothing but the life kicking inside her, and the broken pieces of a life she once thought was hers. The world beyond the iron gates of the Blackwood estate was a churning vortex of wind and water. Ilara's thin slippers were no match for the gravel of the long, winding driveway. Each step was a torturous effort, the sharp stones digging into her soles as the icy rain soaked her to the bone. The contractions, which had been mild Braxton Hicks for weeks, now began to grip her with a new, sharper intensity, a painful rhythm that mirrored the pounding of the storm. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her shock. She had to get to safety, for her baby. The main road was miles away. No cars would be coming down this private lane tonight. Her only option was to walk. She wrapped her arms around her belly, trying to shield her unborn child from the cold, and began the agonizing trek. Headlights occasionally sliced through the darkness on the distant highway symbols of a world that was moving on without her, a world in which she no longer had a place. After what felt like an eternity, her legs trembling with exhaustion and cold, she reached the main road. The roar of passing trucks was deafening, their spray drenching her anew with every pass. She tried to flag someone down her arm, a dead weight she could barely lift. But she was just a ghost in the storm, a drenched, desperate wraith that drivers swerved to avoid. Defeated, she spotted a faint, flickering light through the trees off the side of the road. A sign read, "The Starlight Motel, Vacancy." It looked dilapidated, the kind of place people go when they have no other options. She was one of those people now. The motel office was a small, stuffy room that smelled of stale cigarette smoke and bleach. A balding man with a kind, tired face named George sat behind the counter, watching an old black-and-white movie on a small television. He looked up as she dripped onto his linoleum floor, his eyes widening with concern. "Good heavens, child, what happened to you? You look like you wrestled a hurricane." I need a room," Ilara stammered, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. "But I don't have any money. My husband, he threw me out." The words felt like ash in her mouth. George's expression softened from surprise to pity. He looked at her belly, then back at her pale, rain-streaked face. "Husband, huh? Well, any man who'd throw his pregnant wife out into a night like this isn't a husband. He's a monster." He sighed, running a hand over his head. "Look, I can't give you a room for free. The owner would have my hide. But, you can stay here in the office for a bit. Warm up. I've got a blanket in the back and some tea." Gratitude washed over Ilara so intensely it brought a fresh wave of tears. She sank into the worn vinyl chair he offered, accepting the thick, scratchy wool blanket he draped over her shoulders. The hot mug of tea he pressed into her hands was the first warmth she'd felt in hours. As she sipped the tea, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a profound, crushing despair. Her life was in ruins. She had no family to call. Her parents had passed away years ago in a car accident, leaving her with nothing but a small insurance policy she'd used for her college education. She had no friends nearby. Julian had systematically isolated her from her old life, deeming her acquaintances unsuitable. She was completely and utterly alone. A sharp, searing pain shot through her abdomen, making her gasp and clutch the mug tightly. George noticed immediately. "You all right there?" "It's the baby," she breathed, another wave of pain cresting. "The contractions, they're getting closer." Panic flared in George's eyes. Okay, stay calm. We need to call an ambulance." He reached for the phone. "No," Ilara cried out, the word torn from her. "I can't. I don't have insurance. Not anymore. It was tied to Julian's company. I can't afford a hospital." George paused, his hand hovering over the receiver. He looked at the desperate, terrified young woman before him, and a lifetime of quiet compassion stirred within him. "All right," he said softly, his decision made. "My sister Maria. She's a midwife. Retired, but she knows more than any 10 doctors. She lives just 15 minutes from here. Let me call her." The next hour was a blur. George helped her into his old rattling pickup truck, the heater blasting on full. He drove through the storm-ravaged streets to a small, neat house with a porch light burning like a beacon. A warm, round woman with salt and pepper hair, and the calmest eyes Ilara had ever seen, met them at the door. This was Maria. She took one look at Ilara and ushered her inside without a word, guiding her to a clean, simple bedroom in the back. The house smelled of cinnamon and lavender. It was the smell of safety. "Let's get you out of these wet things," Maria said, her voice a soothing balm. "George, put the kettle on, and bring the towels from the linen closet." Under Maria's expert care, Ilara felt a sliver of her terror recede. Maria was efficient, kind, and asked no probing questions about how Ilara had ended up in such a state. She only focused on the task at hand, the baby. As dawn approached, the storm outside began to subside, its fury spent. Inside the small house, Ilara's own storm was reaching its crescendo. Through the haze of pain and exhaustion, she held on to Maria's steady presence and George's quiet words of encouragement from the hallway. And then, with the first rays of the morning sun filtering through the window, a new sound filled the room. The strong, healthy cry of a newborn baby. Maria gently cleaned the infant and wrapped her in a soft blanket before placing her in Ilara's arms. "You have a beautiful, healthy daughter," she whispered, her eyes shining. Ilara looked down at the tiny, perfect face, the small tuft of dark hair, the impossibly small fingers that curled around her own. All the pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak of the last 12 hours melted away, replaced by a fierce, primal love that was more powerful than anything she had ever known. This was her daughter, her family, her reason to fight. "Hello, little one," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm your mummy." She decided on a name right then, a name that meant light and hope. Aurora. Lying there, weak but resolute with baby Aurora, sleeping peacefully on her chest, Ilara made a silent vow. She would not be a victim. She would not let the Blackwoods destroy her. For Aurora's sake, she would build a new life, a safe life, even if she had to do it with her bare hands, starting from nothing. She had no idea that nothing was about to change. Just as she was drifting into a much-needed sleep, a polite but firm knock echoed from the front door. George went to answer it. Ilara could hear the low murmur of voices, one of them unfamiliar, a man's voice, cultured and precise. A moment later, George appeared at the bedroom door, a strange expression on his face. "Ilara, there's a man here to see you. Says his name is Alistair Finch, a lawyer. He says it's a matter of the utmost urgency. He's talking about an inheritance." Ilara sat up, clutching the blanket around her shoulders, Aurora sleeping soundly in a makeshift bassinet beside the bed. A lawyer. Here. It had to be a mistake, or worse, a trick sent by Julian to serve her with divorce papers and strip her of any possible claim. Fear, cold and familiar, coiled in her stomach again. "I don't want to see him," she told George weakly. "I think you should, honey," George said, his tone insistent. "He's not from around here. dressed in a suit that probably costs more than my truck. And he mentioned a name, Arthur Pendleton. The name meant nothing to Elara. I don't know anyone by that name. Just hear him out, George urged. Reluctantly, Elara agreed. Maria helped her into a clean, dry robe, and she made her way into the small, tidy living room. The man standing by the window was tall and impeccably dressed in a charcoal grey suit holding a leather briefcase. He had greying temples, sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and an air of quiet authority. He turned as she entered, and his stern expression softened with something that looked like relief. "Mrs. Blackwood Elara Croft, as you were," he asked, his voice calm and respectful. "It's just Elara," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Who are you?" "My name is Alistair Finch. I am the executor of the estate of the late Mr. Arthur Pendleton. I must apologize for the intrusion, but I have been trying to locate you for several weeks. It has proven remarkably difficult." "I told George I don't know an Arthur Pendleton." Mr. Finch gave a small, sad smile. "I'm not surprised. Arthur was your maternal grandfather." Elara stared at him, utterly bewildered. Her mother, who had died when Elara was a teenager, rarely spoke of her family. She had always said they were estranged, that they had disowned her for marrying Elara's father, a simple librarian with a heart of gold, but no fortune to his name. She'd never even known her grandfather's name. "My grandfather," she repeated the words, feeling foreign on her tongue. "Indeed. Arthur Pendleton was a very private, very wealthy man. He and your mother, Elizabeth, had a falling out many years ago. It was a source of his deepest regret, a regret he sought to rectify. He spent years trying to find her, and when he finally succeeded, he learned she had tragically passed away. His search then shifted to you, his only living descendant." Alistair Finch opened his briefcase on the coffee table. The clicks of the latches were loud in the quiet room. He produced a thick, professionally bound document. "Mr. Pendleton passed away 2 months ago, at the age of 94, he continued gently. "He left behind a considerable estate, and a very specific last will and testament. Elara, he left everything to you." Elara felt the room spin. It was too much to process. The trauma of the night before the birth of her daughter, and now this. It felt like a dream, a feverish hallucination. "Everything. What? What is everything?" "Mr. Pendleton's portfolio is extensive." Mr. Finch said, his tone matter of fact. "Stocks International Properties, a significant art collection. But the centerpiece of his estate, his primary residence, is a property I believe you are familiar with. A place known as Willow Creek Manor." Elara shook her head. "I've never heard of it." Mr. Finch slid a large, glossy photograph from a folder and placed it on the table. Elara gasped. It was the mansion, the Blackwood Mansion. The grand, sprawling estate with its manicured lawns and towering oak trees. The house she had just been thrown out of. "No," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. That's Blackwood Manor. Julian's family has owned it for generations." A common misconception, and one Beatrice Blackwood was all too happy to perpetuate. Mr. Finch corrected her, a hint of steel in his voice. "The Blackwoods have never owned the estate. Arthur Pendleton was a man who valued his privacy above all else. 40 years ago, he granted Julian's father, Thomas Blackwood, a lifetime lease on the property for a nominal fee of $1 a year. It was a deal struck between old friends. Thomas was a decent man, and Arthur was happy to have the estate occupied and cared for. The terms of the lease were simple. The lease would remain in effect for the duration of Thomas's life and could be extended to his wife Beatrice upon his passing. However, the lease explicitly states that it is terminated immediately upon her death, or should the legal ownership of the property transfer to Mr. Pendleton's designated heir. Thomas passed away 5 years ago. Beatrice has been living there on borrowed time. He tapped the will. Upon my death, ownership of the Willow Creek Manor and all its contents transfers immediately and irrevocably to my granddaughter Elara Croft. The lifetime lease granted to the Blackwood family is hereby terminated effective the moment my heir takes possession. Elara's mind reeled, trying to connect the dots. Julian and Beatrice knew. They must have known. Their entire life, their social standing, their identity. It was all built on a lie, a borrowed foundation. Why didn't they ever tell me? She asked, the scope of their deception dawning on her. Greed, Mr. Finch said simply, and arrogance. I have been managing Mr. Pendleton's affairs for 30 years. After his passing, I sent certified letters to the residents addressed to you. They were repeatedly returned marked unknown occupant. Beatrice and Julian were actively hiding your identity from us, hoping to contest the will and claim squatters' rights or draw out the legal process for years. They likely assumed you would never discover the truth. He leaned forward slightly. Last night I decided on a more direct approach. I came to the manor myself to deliver the documents in person. I arrived just in time to witness a most distressing scene. I saw them force you out into the storm. I followed you, ensuring your safety from a distance, which is how I found you here. Forgive me for not intervening sooner, but I needed to assess the situation and ensure I approached you at the right time. The cruelty I witnessed last night. It has made my duty today not only a professional one, but a personal one. Elara looked from the photograph of the mansion to the face of the kind lawyer, and then thought of Aurora, her tiny, precious daughter. The despair she had felt just hours ago began to recede, replaced by a slow-burning ember of righteous anger. They hadn't just thrown her out. They had thrown her out of her own home. They had cast her aside while living on her family's legacy, a legacy they had tried to steal from her. What happens now? She asked, her voice stronger, now clearer. Alistair Finch closed his briefcase, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. Now we follow Mr. Pendleton's wishes to the letter. First we see to your and your daughter's immediate needs. I have a suite reserved for you at the Four Seasons downtown. We will arrange for medical care clothes, anything you require. We will give you a few hours to rest and recover. And then, he paused, allowing the weight of his next words to land. Then we go back to the manor. Not as Elara Blackwood, the discarded wife, but as Elara Pendleton Croft, the rightful owner of the estate, and you will tell them to leave. The image was so staggering, so impossible, that Elara almost laughed. Yesterday she was a charity case. Today she was a landlady. The ultimate irony was not lost on her. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely upended. They won't leave without a fight, she said, thinking of Beatrice's venomous pride. Oh, I am counting on it, Mr. Finch replied, a predatory gleam in his eye. Mr. Pendleton was a meticulous man. The will is ironclad, and the lease termination is non-negotiable. I have already notified local law enforcement of a potential trespassing situation at the property, should the current occupants refuse to vacate. We, Miss Croft, have every advantage. He stood up, offering her a hand. Are you ready to claim your birthright? Looking at her sleeping daughter, the innocent heir to this incredible hidden legacy, Elara found a strength she never knew she possessed. She took his hand, her grip firm. Yes, she said, her voice ringing with newfound resolve. I am. The suite at the Four Seasons was a world away from the Starlight Motel. It was a palace in the sky with panoramic views of the city rooms larger than Maria's entire house and a bathroom clad in Italian marble. But for Elara, its greatest luxury was safety. Mr. Finch, ever the consummate professional, had orchestrated everything with quiet efficiency. A discreet doctor was summoned to check on both Elara and baby Aurora, pronouncing them both healthy and strong despite their ordeal. A personal shopper from Bergdorf Goodman arrived with an entire rack of clothing for Elara. Elegant cashmere sweaters, tailored trousers, silk blouses, and a stunning, perfectly fitted navy blue dress made of heavy wool crepe. There were also bags filled with everything a newborn could possibly need, from the softest organic cotton onesies to a state-of-the-art bassinet. For the first time in 2 years, Elara was not choosing clothes to please Beatrice or to fit the mold of the demure Mrs. Blackwood. She was choosing for herself. The navy dress felt like armor. It was sophisticated, powerful, and understated. It was the dress of a woman who was in control. While Elara showered and dressed, Mr. Finch sat in the suite's living room, briefing her on the Pendleton estate. He laid out financial statements, property deeds, and a portfolio summary that made her head spin. The numbers were astronomical beyond anything she could have comprehended. She was not just wealthy, she was one of the wealthiest women in the state. But it was the personal file on her grandfather that truly captured her attention. It contained old photographs, letters he had written but never sent to her mother, and a handwritten journal. As Aurora slept peacefully, Elara read through her grandfather's words. Arthur Pendleton was not the cold, distant tycoon she might have imagined. His writing revealed a man of deep intellect, quiet humor, and profound loneliness. He wrote of his heartbreak over the rift with his daughter Elizabeth. He detailed his regrets, his pride, and his desperate hope to one day find her and her child. In one entry dated just a year ago, he wrote, "I see her face in strangers. My Elizabeth. I failed her. I let my stubborn pride build a wall between us, and now that wall is insurmountable. But if her child is out there, if my grandchild breathes the same air, I will not fail again. Everything I have built, this empire of steel and glass, it is all meaningless without blood. It is all for her. A home, a fortress, a future, a legacy she doesn't even know she has." Tears welled in Elara's eyes. This was the man whose blood ran in her veins. This was the source of her inheritance. It wasn't just money and property. It was a grandfather's love reaching out to her from beyond the grave. It solidified her resolve. She wasn't doing this for revenge. She was doing this to honor him, to fulfill his final wish, and to build the safe fortress for Aurora that he had intended. Alistair Finch watched her, his expression unreadable. "He would have been incredibly proud of you," he said softly. "Your resilience. He always valued strength of character above all else." "They thought my character was my weakness," Elara murmured, folding a letter carefully. "My quietness, my desire to keep the peace. They saw it as fragility. The willow tree bends in the wind, while the mighty oak cracks," Mr. Finch quoted. "Your grandfather had that saying framed in his study. He would appreciate the irony of his estate being named Willow Creek Manor." A new sense of self began to settle over Elara. The frightened, pleading woman from the night before was gone. In her place was a mother, a granddaughter, an heiress. The transformation was more than just the designer dress and the luxury suite. It was internal. A fire had been lit, forged in the crucible of betrayal, and ignited by the revelation of her heritage. By mid-afternoon, she was ready. She fed Aurora, swaddled her in a cashmere blanket, and placed her gently into the secure car seat Mr. Finch had procured. Elara looked at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was someone she barely recognized. Her eyes, though tired, held a new, unyielding light. There was a quiet confidence in her posture, a set to her jaw that had not been there before. She was no longer just Elara. She was the last of the Pendleton line. Downstairs, a black Lincoln Navigator, the epitome of discreet power, was waiting for them. A driver held the door open. Mr. Finch sat in the passenger seat, while Elara settled in the back with Aurora. As the car pulled away from the curb and headed toward the familiar tree-lined roads leading to the estate, a calm certainty settled over her. She wasn't returning to the scene of her humiliation. She was going home. "Are you ready?" Alistair asked, turning slightly in his seat to look at her. Elara adjusted Aurora's blanket, her hand resting protectively on the car seat. She thought of Julian's cold eyes, Beatrice's venomous words, and Isabella's triumphant smirk. She thought of the cold rain, the fear, the despair. And then she thought of her grandfather's journal and the sleeping baby beside her. "They have no idea what's coming," she said, her voice perfectly even. "Let's go." The car turned onto the long private driveway. The grand facade of Willow Creek Manor rose up before them, magnificent and imposing. The Blackwood family crest, a pompous and gaudy addition, was mounted above the door. Elara made a mental note to have it removed first thing. The car didn't stop at the grand entrance. It swept past, following the curve of the drive toward the main gates, then pulled to a stop just outside. "Why are we stopping here?" Elara asked. "Protocol." Mr. Finch said, a faint smile on his lips, as he gestured to a second identical black SUV that had pulled up behind them. "The transfer of property must be official. First we secure the perimeter." Out of the second vehicle stepped 2 uniformed police officers and a locksmith. One of the officers approached their window. "Mr. Finch, we're ready when you are, ma'am," he said, nodding respectfully to Elara. "It's time, Elara," Alistair said. "The locks on the gate and all the doors to the manor are about to be changed. Once that process begins for legal purposes, anyone inside who refuses to leave is officially trespassing." Elara took a deep breath, the phoenix rising from the ashes of her old life. She was ready to reclaim her kingdom. The locksmith, a man named Dave, with efficient, no-nonsense hands, made quick work of the electronic gate controls. With a soft whir and a decisive click, the old system was disabled and a new one installed. He handed a small remote to Mr. Finch. "It's all yours," Dave said. Mr. Finch passed the remote to Elara. Her fingers closed around the cool plastic. It was the first key to her new life. With a press of a button, the grand iron gates of Willow Creek Manor swung open at her command. "Shall we?" Alistair prompted. Their Lincoln Navigator led the way, gliding smoothly up the driveway. They didn't park discreetly to the side. The driver pulled directly in front of the main entrance, blocking the circular drive with an assertion of indisputable presence. The front doors opened before they could even step out of the car. Beatrice Blackwood emerged, dressed in a sharp tweed suit, her face a mask of furious confusion. Julian and Isabella followed close behind Julian, looking irritated. Isabella, looking bored. They had clearly seen the procession from a window. "What is the meaning of this?" Beatrice demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass as Elara stepped out of the vehicle. "Have you come back to beg? I knew you didn't have the spine to make it on your own. And who are these people? The police? Are you trying to harass us?" Elara said nothing. She simply walked to the rear of the car where the driver was already unbuckling Aurora's car seat and gently lifted her sleeping daughter into her arms. Cradling her baby, she turned to face her former family. Julian's eyes flickered from Ilara's expensive dress and confident posture to the imposing figure of Alistair Finch. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "Ilara, what is this? What have you done? It's not what I've done, Julian." Ilara replied, her voice calm and steady, betraying none of the nervous energy thrumming beneath the surface. "It's about what you have done. What you have all done." Mr. Finch stepped forward, his leather briefcase in hand. "Beatrice Blackwood, Julian Blackwood. My name is Alistair Finch. I am the legal executor of the estate of the late Arthur Pendleton, the legal and sole owner of this property." Beatrice scoffed. "Pendleton? That old recluse has been dead for months. This is Blackwood Manor. Our family has lived here for 40 years. You have resided here," Mr. Finch corrected smoothly, opening his briefcase. "Under the terms of a lifetime lease granted to you by Mr. Pendleton. A lease which, according to Section 4, Paragraph B, is rendered null and void upon the legal transfer of the property to his designated heir." He produced the will, its blue ribbon a stark contrast to the grey sky. "And as per his last will and testament, as of 2 months ago, 100% of the Pendleton estate, including this house, and all 50 acres of land it sits upon, was transferred to his sole surviving descendant." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air, before delivering the final devastating blow. He gestured toward Ilara. "Meet Ilara Pendleton Croft, your landlord, and your eviction notice." The colour drained from Beatrice's face. Julian stared at Ilara, his mouth slightly agape, as if seeing her for the first time. Disbelief, confusion, and the dawning horror of comprehension warred in his expression. Isabella was the first to recover, letting out a tinkling, incredulous laugh. "You can't be serious. She's a nobody, an orphan you picked up from a state college. This is some kind of pathetic trick." "The documentation is all here," Mr. Finch said, unfazed. He handed a thick packet to one of the police officers, who began to review it. "The deed to the property in Mr. Pendleton's name, the original lease agreement signed by Thomas and Beatrice Blackwood, the notarized last will and testament, and the official transfer of title to my client." The officer looked up after a moment. "It all seems to be in order, ma'am," he said, addressing Beatrice, but with a newfound tone of formality. The reality began to crash down on the Blackwoods. Julian took a stumbling step forward. "Ilara, is this true? Your grandfather, the grandfather you never allowed me to know about," Ilara said, her voice laced with ice. "The letters from his lawyer you returned to sender. The legacy you tried to hide from me while you lived in his house, enjoying his generosity, all while treating me like dirt." Beatrice's face contorted with rage, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. "You lie. This is a forgery. This house is ours." "It has never been yours," Ilara stated flatly. "You've been tenants, and your lease is terminated. I am the owner of Willow Creek Manor now." She took a step toward the door, her gaze unwavering. "I am giving you 1 hour to pack your personal belongings and vacate the premises. Anything left behind after that will be disposed of." "1 hour," Julian sputtered. "That's insane. We live here. All of our things are here." "You should have thought of that last night when you threw me and your unborn child out into a storm with nothing but the clothes on my back." Ilara shot back, her voice rising with controlled fury. You were quite content to leave me with nothing. Consider 1 hour a profound generosity." Isabella rushed to Julian's side, her mask of amusement replaced by panic. "Julian, do something. You can't let her do this. What about our merger? My father will never do business with a homeless family." Julian looked wildly from Isabella to Elara, his mind clearly racing for an angle. "Elara, wait. We're still married. That means half of this is mine, right? By law, spousal rights." Mr. Finch stepped forward again, a grim smile touching his lips. "Another contingency for which the prescient Mr. Pendleton prepared. Allow me to introduce you to Clause 12, the character and conduct provision of the inheritance." He pulled out another document. "It stipulates that any individual who marries the heir and is later found through a preponderance of evidence to have acted with malice, infidelity, or committed acts of profound moral turpitude against said heir forfeits any and all community property, claims to the inherited assets." He then slid a slim, unmarked envelope from his briefcase and handed it to Julian. "I believe you'll find this preponderance of evidence quite convincing. It's the full report from the private investigator I hired weeks ago, detailing your affair with Miss Vance, including transcripts of conversations where you discuss your plan to have Elara declared an unfit mother and seize her expected inheritance for yourselves. It seems you overestimated your own cunning and profoundly underestimated your wife's grandfather." Julian's face went from pale to ashen as he looked at the envelope. Isabella recoiled as if it were a venomous snake. They were caught, utterly and completely. Elara walked past them up the stone steps she had been thrown down just the night before. She paused at the threshold, turning to face them one last time. Her baby Aurora stirred in her arms, a soft, sleepy sound. "The clock is ticking," Elara said, her voice echoing with the finality of a judge's gavel. Then she looked directly at Beatrice, the woman who had orchestrated her deepest pain. "Get out of my house." "O tutubu besamul." With that, she turned her back on them, stepped over the threshold, and walked into her home, leaving them standing on the driveway with the ruins of their stolen lives. The hour that followed was a symphony of chaotic, impotent fury. From the drawing room where Elara sat calmly feeding Aurora, she could hear the sounds of the Blackwoods world unraveling. There were slammed doors, Beatrice's screeching commands to overwhelmed staff, and the frantic, hushed arguments between Julian and Isabella. True to her word at the 60-minute mark, Elara, with Mr. Finch by her side, walked to the grand foyer. The scene was one of comical disarray. Several suitcases were packed haphazardly, but the bulk of their opulent possessions remained. Beatrice stood amidst it all, a defiant queen on a sinking ship, her face a thunderous mask of pride. "This is not over," she hissed as Elara approached. "We have lawyers, powerful friends. You will not get away with this theft." "The only thief here is you, Beatrice," Elara replied coolly. "You've been living a lie for 40 years. Your powerful friends will be interested to learn that the formidable Blackwoods are in fact penniless tenants." Just then Julian came rushing down the stairs, his face slick with sweat. He ignored his mother and made a beeline for Elara, his demeanor shifting from arrogant to desperately pleading. "Elara, baby, listen to me," he began, his voice dropping to the intimate tone he used to use when he wanted something. "I was a fool, a complete idiot. I let my mother and Isabella poison my mind. But that baby, she's my daughter. You can't take my daughter away from me." Before Elara could respond, Isabella appeared at the top of the stairs, her face streaked with mascara. Your daughter, she shrieked, her voice raw with hysteria. What about our baby, Julian? You promised me. You said we would raise our child here. This was a twist Elara hadn't expected. She looked at Isabella's perfectly flat stomach, then back at Julian's panicked face. Julian whirled around. Isabella, shut up. Now is not the time. No, I won't shut up, she screamed, descending the stairs like a vengeful fury. He's been lying to all of you. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at Julian. There is no baby. There was never going to be a baby. He told me to fake a pregnancy to give him leverage to get rid of her. She spat the word at Elara. He said it would make the upgrade look better to his business partners. The revelation hung in the air, stunning even Beatrice into silence. The entire premise for kicking Elara out the lie about her unhealthy baby, the need for a healthy Blackwood heir, was a complete fabrication built on another fabrication. It was a house of cards built on a swamp. Julian looked utterly exposed, a cornered rat with nowhere left to run. She's lying. She's hysterical. Am I? Isabella retorted, a wild look in her eyes. Or are you the liar, Julian, the one who also failed to mention that your family's company, Blackwood Holdings, is on the verge of bankruptcy, that the merger with my father was your last-ditch effort to get a bailout? I just got off the phone with my father. He knows everything. The deal is off. We're ruined because of you. The final pillar of the Blackwood facade crumbled. Their wealth was gone. Their home was gone. Their reputation was about to be incinerated in the high society gossip columns. They had nothing. Beatrice seemed to age 20 years in a single moment. She sank onto a packed suitcase, her face a hollow mask of defeat. The fight was gone, replaced by the vacant stare of someone who has lost everything. Julian, however, made one last desperate move. He lunged toward Elara, his hands outstretched not in violence, but in a grotesque pantomime of supplication. Elara, please, forgive me. We can fix this. I love you. I always have. The police officer, who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward, his hand resting on his service weapon. Sir, I suggest you keep your distance from the lady. Elara didn't flinch. She simply looked at the man she had once loved, the father of her child, and felt nothing but a cold, empty pity. The only thing you ever loved, Julian, was the idea of this house, the name, the power you thought it gave you. But it was never yours to love, and neither was I. She turned away from him, a final, complete dismissal. Officer, the hour is up. Please escort these trespassers from my property. The officer nodded. Mr. Blackwood, Mrs. Blackwood, Miss Vance. It's time to go. There was no more fight, no more bluster. Like ghosts, they were ushered out of the grand doors. A taxi, which Mr. Finch had thoughtfully summoned, was waiting for them at the bottom of the steps, a final humiliating punctuation mark on their fall from grace. They would not be leaving in a Bentley or a Rolls-Royce, but in a common yellow cab. Elara watched them go from the doorway. She saw Julian and Isabella arguing on the curb, Beatrice staring blankly at the house she had ruled for so long. As the taxi pulled away, disappearing down the long drive, a profound silence descended upon the manor. It was the first time since she had arrived that the air didn't feel heavy with tension. It felt clean. It felt like hers. Mr. Finch came to stand beside her. It is done. Yes, Elara said, a deep, cleansing breath filling her lungs. She looked down at Aurora, who had slept through the entire ordeal. Now the real work begins. Her first act as the lady of Willow Creek Manor was to call the head of staff, a kindly older butler named Mr. Henderson, whom Beatrice had always treated with contempt. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice clear and kind, "I would like you to arrange for every lock in this house to be changed by morning. And please put on a fresh pot of coffee. I believe we have a lot to discuss about the future." The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity, but it was a chaos of creation, not destruction. Elara, with the steadfast Alistair Finch as her guide, dove headfirst into understanding her new responsibilities. She learned that her grandfather's empire wasn't just a pile of money. It was a functioning web of businesses and investments. More importantly, it included a well-endowed charitable foundation, the Pendleton Foundation, which focused on providing housing and educational grants for single mothers and orphans. It was a revelation. Arthur Pendleton had channeled the pain of losing his daughter into helping others in similar situations. For Elara, this was the most precious part of her inheritance. It was a mission, a purpose. She made immediate changes at the manor. The ostentatious, gaudy decor favored by Beatrice was carefully packed away and replaced with the tasteful, elegant pieces that had been in storage her grandfather's collection. The house began to feel less like a sterile showroom and more like a home. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by one of quiet respect and warmth. She rehired staff that Beatrice had fired for petty reasons, earning their fierce loyalty. Mr. Henderson, the butler, now walked with a lighter step, a genuine smile replacing his formerly strained professional one. News of the Blackwood's spectacular fall from grace ripped through their social circle. The society pages of the New York Post and Vanity Fair had a field day. Julian Blackwood, the disgraced heir, was facing lawsuits from creditors. Isabella Vance's family, embarrassed and furious, had decamped to their villa in Monaco to escape the scandal. Beatrice, the fallen queen, was reportedly staying with a distant cousin in a cramped apartment in Queens, a fate she would have once considered worse than death. One afternoon, about a week after she had reclaimed her home, a letter arrived. It was from Julian, hand-delivered by a courier. It was not a legal threat, but a rambling 12-page plea. He begged for forgiveness, for a second chance, for financial support. He even attempted to use Aurora as a bargaining chip, speaking of a father's right to see his daughter. Elara read the letter, her expression unreadable. Then she walked to the fireplace in her grandfather's study, now her study, and dropped the letter into the flames. She would not allow Julian to be a part of Aurora's life, not until he had truly atoned for his actions and proven he was no longer a danger to their well-being. She would, however, instruct Mr. Finch to set up a small, anonymous trust managed by a third party, to ensure Julian never became completely destitute. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a final act of severing a quiet closing of a chapter, ensuring he would never have a reason to bother her or her daughter again. It was a mercy he didn't deserve, but one she gave freely for her own peace of mind. A few months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Elara stood on the grand terrace overlooking the sprawling lawns of the estate. The trees were ablaze with color, and the air was clean and fresh. Aurora, now a happy, gurgling baby, was in a carrier on her chest, her small hand clutching the simple gold locket Elara always wore. Alistair Finch joined her, holding 2 mugs of steaming tea. He was more than a lawyer now. He was a mentor, a confidant, and a friend. "The board of the foundation approved your proposal," he said, handing her a mug. "The new wing for the women's shelter will be named the Elizabeth Croft Center, in honor of your mother." A real smile, bright and genuine, lit up Ilara's face. "Thank you, Alistair, for everything." "I'm merely fulfilling my duty to your grandfather," he said, though his warm tone suggested otherwise. "He would be so pleased, Ilara. You haven't just inherited his wealth, you've inherited his spirit." Ilara looked out at the vast expanse of her land, her home. She had been thrown from this place with nothing, only to return and claim everything. But the true victory wasn't the mansion or the money. It was the discovery of her own strength. It was the love for her daughter. It was the connection to a grandfather she never knew, and the chance to continue his legacy of kindness. The Blackwoods had believed legacy was about bloodlines, prestige, and power. Ilara now understood that a true legacy was about the good you leave behind in the world. As she held her daughter close, feeling the steady beat of her tiny heart against her own, she knew her work was just beginning. She was not just the lady of Willow Creek Manor. She was the guardian of its future, the architect of a new legacy, one built not on arrogance and lies, but on resilience, compassion, and a mother's unending love. And so Ilara's story comes to a close, not with an act of revenge, but with the quiet, powerful dawn of a new beginning. She teaches us that true strength isn't about the absence of hardship, but how we rise after we have been broken. She walked out of that mansion a victim and returned a victor, not because of the money she inherited, but because she discovered the unshakable power within herself, the power of a mother's love, and the resilience of the human spirit. Her story is a powerful reminder that sometimes our greatest trials lead us to our true destiny, and that the grandest estate is the one we build within our own hearts. If this story of resilience and ultimate triumph moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner strength. And for more stories that will empower and inspire, you don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. What would you have done in Ilara's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening. Have you ever been told your dreams were worthless, that your ideas were nothing more than a childish fantasy? For years, Ilara Vance lived in the shadow of a man who saw her not as a partner, but as a possession. At the most prestigious business gala of the year, her ex-husband, Julian Croft, stood before his peers and mocked her, painting her as a forgotten, lost woman. But he made one fatal error. He assumed she was still the same person he left behind. He had no idea that in just a few minutes, the entire room would be on its feet. Not for him, but for her. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's a story of resurrection. The chandeliers of the St. Regis Grand Ballroom dripped with crystal light, casting a golden glow on the city's most powerful figures. The Metropolis Annual Business Gala was the apex of the corporate social calendar, a sea of bespoke suits and designer gowns, where deals were whispered over champagne and legacies were cemented with a handshake. And at the center of it all, holding court like a modern-day monarch, was Julian Croft. At 42, Julian was the epitome of success. His chiseled jaw, silver-streaked dark hair, and custom-tailored Tom Ford suit screamed power. His company, Croft Enterprises, had its steel and glass fingers wrapped around the city's skyline. He was charismatic, ruthless, and utterly convinced of his own brilliance. Hanging on his arm was Tiffany, a model-turned-influencer, 2 decades his junior, whose dazzling smile was as much a status symbol as his Patek Philippe watch. Julian, darling. You know everyone here. Tiffany murmured, her voice a breathy purr. I don't just know them. My dear Julian corrected her, with a patronizing smirk, taking a sip of his Macallan 25. I own a piece of most of them. Their mortgages, their business loans, the buildings they work in. In this room, I am the house. His audience, a small group of rival developers and fawning junior partners, chuckled appreciatively. Marcus Thorne, a portly man whose company had narrowly avoided a hostile takeover by Croft Enterprises, clapped Julian on the back. To the house, Marcus boomed, raising his glass. Julian's eyes scanned the room, a predator surveying his domain. Everything was perfect. The market was strong. His latest high-rise was a triumph of architecture and ego, and Tiffany was an exquisite accessory. He had shed all the dead weight from his life, meticulously curating an existence that was as polished and impenetrable as one of his skyscrapers. The most significant piece of dead weight in his mind had been his ex-wife, Elara Vance. Their divorce had been finalized 2 years ago, a quiet affair he'd orchestrated to be as swift and painless as possible for him. He had been generous, of course. A man of his stature had to appear magnanimous. He'd given her the suburban house they'd once shared, and a settlement he considered more than sufficient for a woman with no discernible career prospects. He remembered their last conversation in that sterile lawyer's office. She had been so small. Her fire, the spark that had once drawn him in, seemed utterly extinguished. She had simply signed the papers, her hand trembling slightly, and walked away without a word. He had felt a pang of something, not guilt, but a sort of pity. Pity for a woman who couldn't keep up, who had hitched her wagon to a rocket and been shaken off on the ascent. Speaking of old times, Liam Sterling, a hedge fund manager with weasel-like features, chimed in, leaning closer. I was just thinking, I haven't seen your ex. What was her name? Elena around at all? Elara, Julian corrected him, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. He waved a dismissive hand. And you wouldn't have seen her. She doesn't exactly move in these circles. She never did not, really. She was always more comfortable with her. Let's call them hobbies. The group leaned in, sensing the delicious scent of gossip. Julian, never one to disappoint an audience, placed his glass on a passing waiter's tray and prepared to perform. This was his stage, and the story of his failed first marriage was one of his favorite tragedies to narrate with himself as the long-suffering protagonist. She was a dreamer, he began, his voice dripping with condescension. Always had her head in the clouds, while I was out here in the real world, building an empire brick by brick. She was in her little home office, with her sketchbooks and her colored pencils. He paused for effect, letting the image sink in. She had this grand vision, he said, making air quotes with his fingers. She called it Aurasphere. Can you believe it sounded like a New Age yoga studio? It was all about sustainable living and integrated eco-architecture. She'd draw these fantastical buildings that looked like they were woven from trees and waterfalls. All very pretty, I suppose, if you're a child. The men around him snickered. Tiffany squeezed his arm, her expression a perfect blend of sympathy for him and disdain for the woman she'd never met. I tried to be supportive, God knows I did. Julian sighed, mastering a look of weary patience. I told her, sweetheart, that's a lovely hobby. Maybe you can design a new garden shed for the backyard. But she actually thought it was a viable business. She wanted to pitch it to investors. Can you imagine me, Julian Croft, walking into a boardroom and asking for $100 million based on a bunch of crayon drawings? The laughter was louder this time. Julian felt a rush of validation. He was rewriting history, painting himself as the patient husband, burdened by a naive, delusional wife. The truth was far more complicated. He had not just been unsupportive, he had been destructive. He'd mocked her relentlessly, shredded her confidence piece by piece, telling her the world of business was too savage for a soul as gentle as hers. He had crushed her dream, not because he thought it would fail, but because he was terrified it might succeed without him. Her independence was a threat to his control. "So what's she doing now?" Marcus asked, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "Is she still drawing her fairy tale castles?" Julian's smile was a cruel slash across his face. "Last I heard, she sold the house, probably living off the settlement, running some little online shop for handcrafted jewelry, or teaching pottery to bored housewives in the suburbs. It's for the best. Some people just aren't built for the real world. They're meant to stay in the background. She was a lovely footnote in my life story, but the main chapters, gentlemen, the main chapters are happening right now." He raised his glass, the smug satisfaction radiating off him like heat. In his mind, Elara Vance was a ghost, a relic of a past he had successfully shed. She was insignificant, a forgotten memory. He had no idea that just beyond the grand oak doors of the ballroom, the footnote was about to become the headline. While Julian was basking in the glow of his own revisionist history, Elara Vance sat in the back of a black Mercedes Maybach, the buttery leather cool against her skin. She wasn't looking at the grand entrance of the St. Regis, but at a tablet resting on her lap. The screen displayed a complex 3D model of a city block, a symphony of green spaces, flowing architecture and integrated energy systems. It was a digital, evolved version of the very sketches Julian had so callously ridiculed. It was Aurasphere. She wore a midnight blue gown by a designer so exclusive most people in the ballroom wouldn't even recognize the name. It wasn't flashy or ostentatious. It was architectural, with clean lines, a structured bodice, and a flowing silk skirt that hinted at strength rather than fragility. A single elegant diamond necklace, the Star of Geneva, rested against her collarbone. It was a piece she had purchased herself not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Each facet represented a battle won, a doubter silenced, a sleepless night spent turning a dream into a multi-billion-dollar reality. Her phone buzzed. The caller ID read Arthur Sterling. She smiled and answered. "You're parked outside, aren't you?" Arthur's voice was a gravelly, comforting baritone. He was a titan of Silicon Valley, a legendary venture capitalist who had retired from the public eye years ago, but still pulled strings from the shadows. He had been her first believer. "I am Elara," admitted her own voice, steady though a hummingbird fluttered in her chest. "Just taking a moment." "Nervous, terrified," she said with a soft laugh. "It's been a long time since I've been in a room like that, and I know he'll be there." There was a pause on the other end. Arthur knew the entire story. She had stumbled into his office 3 years ago, a referral from a patent lawyer. She had been a shell of a woman clutching a portfolio of designs and a business plan she could barely articulate through her shattered confidence. But Arthur had seen past the timid presentation. He saw the genius in her designs, the revolutionary potential of her integrated systems. He saw the fire that Julian had tried so hard to extinguish, still glowing deep within. "Elara," Arthur said, his voice firm. "You are not the woman who walked out of that divorce court. That woman is gone. Tonight you are not Julian Croft's ex-wife. He is your forgotten past. You are the CEO of Aurasphere. You are the visionary who secured more second-round funding than any green tech startup in history. You are the woman who is about to single-handedly reshape the future of this city. Remember who you are." His words were a balm, a shield. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. He was right. The Alara who flinched at Julian's casual cruelty, who cried herself to sleep over his dismissal of her life's work, was a ghost. She had spent the last 2 years in a crucible. She had moved to a small apartment in Palo Alto, lived on instant noodles and coffee, and poured every cent of her settlement and every ounce of her being into her company. She had worked 18-hour days, coded until her fingers were numb, and pitched her vision with a desperate passion that was impossible to ignore. Arthur's initial seed money had opened the door, but her brilliance had blown it off its hinges. "Thank you, Arthur," she whispered. "I needed to hear that." "Good. Now the stage is set." Mr. Harrison is about to make his introductory remarks. Croft has no idea what's coming. None of them do. They think the keynote speaker is some old guard banker from New York. This is your moment. Don't walk in there for revenge. Walk in there for business. The fact that it will feel like revenge is just a delightful bonus. She could hear the grin in his voice. "I'll see you inside," she said, and ended the call. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window of the car. The woman staring back was a stranger, and yet more herself than she had ever been. The fear was still there, a low thrum beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a profound, unshakable sense of purpose. Julian had once told her she was a footnote. Tonight, she would present him with a new book, written in a language of success he could not possibly comprehend. Her driver, a discreet man named Charles, looked at her in the rear-view mirror. "Ready, Miss Vance?" Elara met his eyes, her own clear and focused. "Yes, Charles. I'm ready." As she stepped out of the car, the cool night air hit her skin. She didn't look up at the glittering facade of the hotel. Her gaze was fixed forward on the massive oak doors that separated her past from her future. With a deep, centering breath, she began to walk the silk of her gown, whispering against the pavement with each determined step. Inside, the laughter at Julian's table had just died down. He was accepting another backslap from Marcus, feeling expansive and invincible. The lights in the ballroom began to dim, and a hush fell over the crowd. On stage, Charles Harrison, the distinguished silver-haired CEO of the Metropolis Chamber of Commerce, tapped the microphone. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," Harrison's voice boomed. "Thank you all for joining us tonight. We know you're all eager to get to the networking and the open bar," he said, earning a polite chuckle. "But we have a very special announcement to make before we do. One that concerns the very future of our great city." Julian leaned toward Tiffany. "This will be about the downtown revitalization project," he whispered. "My firm has the inside track. We've been courting the city council for months. This is basically our victory lap." Tiffany looked at him with wide, adoring eyes, completely captivated. "For months," Harrison continued, "the city has been searching for a primary partner, a lead investor, with not just the capital, but the vision to transform our downtown core into a model for the 21st century. We received bids from the biggest names in development and finance." He paused, looking around the room. "Tonight I am thrilled to announce that we have not only found that partner, but she is here with us to share her vision." Julian sat up straighter, a confident smile playing on his lips. He was momentarily confused. Maybe it was the CEO of that international investment group, a formidable German woman he'd met once. Still, his firm would be the primary contractor. He was sure of it. She is a trailblazer, a prodigy in the tech and sustainable architecture space. Harrison's voice swelled with excitement. Her company, though new, has already been hailed as the most innovative force in urban development. It is my profound honor to introduce our keynote speaker and the new lead investor in the $10 billion Metropolis Downtown Revitalization Project. The air in the ballroom was thick with anticipation. Julian felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. The description didn't fit anyone he knew. The most innovative force that wasn't his company's reputation. They were known for being solid, reliable, and profitable, not innovative. Then at the far end of the ballroom, the grand oak doors swung silently open. For a moment, all that was visible was a silhouette, a figure framed by the bright light of the lobby beyond. A collective inhale seemed to pass through the room. The figure was poised, elegant, and radiated an aura of such quiet, potent authority that all chatter ceased. The only sound was the soft strains of the string quartet, which now seemed hesitant, almost questioning. Julian squinted, a frown creasing his brow. The silhouette was female, that much was clear. The cut of the gown was unfamiliar. He felt a strange, inexplicable prickle of unease at the back of his neck, a sense of dissonant familiarity he couldn't quite place. Then she took a step forward into the soft golden light of the ballroom. Time seemed to slow down. The woman who emerged from the doorway was not a stranger, but she was not the woman Julian remembered either. The mousy brown hair he recalled was now a rich, deep auburn, styled in a sophisticated chignon that highlighted the graceful line of her neck. The face once prone to nervous uncertainty was now serene and confident, her features sharpened by a purpose he had never seen in her before, and her eyes which had so often been downcast or filled with a desperate plea for his approval, were now level clear and held a glint of polished steel. It was Alara. Julian's mind refused to process what his eyes were seeing. It was like watching a character from a forgotten dream walk into his waking reality. His confident smile froze, then melted from his face, replaced by a slack-jawed gape of utter disbelief. The glass of Macallan in his hand felt impossibly heavy. Across the room, whispers erupted like brush fires. "Who is that? I've never seen her before. Look at that necklace. Is that? My God, she's stunning." Tiffany, oblivious, leaned into Julian. "Darling, who is she?" "Do you know her?" "She's very beautiful." Julian couldn't form words. A strangled noise caught in his throat. He felt the blood drain from his face, a cold dread coiling in his stomach. He looked at his friends, Marcus and Liam. Their smirking faces, still lingering from his cruel jokes, now mirrored his own shock. They recognized her, too. The pathetic, forgotten ex-wife. The woman with the crayon drawings. Alara's gaze swept across the room, calm and measured. She didn't seek anyone out. She didn't need to. Her very presence had hijacked the evening, bending the room's energy towards her. She walked with a fluid grace that was entirely new. Her head held high, her posture perfect. She wasn't striding or sashaying. She was proceeding like a queen, entering her throne room. Mr. Harrison on stage beamed his voice, ringing with triumph, as he completed the introduction he had so deliberately paused. "Please welcome the founder and CEO of Aurasphere, Miss Alara Vance." The name hit the room like a thunderclap. Aurasphere. For most, it was a new, intriguing name. But for Julian Croft, it was a ghost. It was the name he had mocked, the dream He had ridiculed the New Age yoga studio he had laughed out of his house. The sound of it spoken with such reverence in this cathedral of commerce was a physical blow. It knocked the air from his lungs. His reality tilted on its axis, the solid ground beneath his feet turning to quicksand. No, it's not possible, a coincidence. It has to be a different company, a different person. But he knew it wasn't. He knew with a sickening certainty that was flooding his veins with ice. Elara reached the small set of stairs leading to the stage and ascended them without a tremor. She shook Mr. Harrison's hand warmly, her smile genuine and radiant. As she turned to face the audience, a wave of applause, hesitant at first, began to swell. It started with a few people in the front, city officials and investors who were in on the secret. Then it spread. In a corner booth, a distinguished man with a shock of white hair and a knowing smile got to his feet, clapping enthusiastically. It was Arthur Sterling. His standing ovation was a signal. Others, recognizing the legendary VC, followed his lead. One by one, then in entire sections, the titans of industry, the bankers, the lawyers, the power brokers, the very people Julian had spent his life trying to impress, rose to their feet. The sound became a roar. The entire room, a constellation of the city's elite, was standing. They were not just applauding. They were paying homage. They were acknowledging the arrival of a new, formidable power in their midst. And Julian Croft. He remained seated, paralyzed in his chair, a statue of obsolescence in a rising tide. Tiffany was tugging at his arm, her voice a confused whisper. "Julian, shouldn't we stand up? Everyone is standing." He couldn't move. He could only stare at the woman on the stage. The woman who was supposed to be a footnote, his footnote. She stood in the spotlight, bathed in the adulation of his peers, looking not at him, not even in his direction, but out at the future she was now commanding. In that moment, he realized the devastating truth. She hadn't just moved on. She had ascended to a level he couldn't have even conceived of for her. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost a war he never even knew he was fighting. The king was still in his castle, but the castle walls were crumbling around him. Elara stood at the podium, a figure of calm in the epicenter of the storm she had created. The applause washed over her, a wave of validation so powerful it almost took her breath away. For a fleeting second, her eyes found Julian's across the cavernous room. She saw him sitting a solitary island of disbelief in a sea of standing figures. She saw the color drain from his face, the smug superiority replaced by a mask of raw, unfiltered shock. There was no triumph in her gaze, no, "I told you so." There was only a quiet, final acknowledgement. A door closing. Then she dismissed him from her thoughts as easily as he had once dismissed her dreams. He was irrelevant now. Her focus was on the hundreds of other faces looking up at her, waiting to hear her vision. She smiled warmly, a genuine expression that reached her eyes and raised a hand. The applause slowly subsided, the crowd retaking their seats with a rustle of silk and wool. A profound silence fell over the ballroom, a silence of anticipation and respect. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison." Elara began, her voice clear and resonant, amplified by the microphone, but losing none of its natural warmth. It was a voice that had been honed in countless boardrooms over the past 2 years, a voice that commanded attention without demanding it. "And thank you, everyone. It is an honor to be here tonight, in a city that I have always called home." She paused, letting her words settle. "Many of you in this room are builders." She continued, her eyes scanning the audience. "You build skyscrapers that touch the clouds. You build financial empires that span the globe. You build legacies. For a long time, I was told that my own ideas about building were unconventional, that they were the stuff of fantasy, not of concrete and steel. A few knowing glances were exchanged around the room. It was a subtle, elegant jab, but its target was unmistakable. Julian felt it like a physical sting, his skin prickling with humiliation. "My fantasy," Elara said, a confident smile playing on her lips, "was a simple one. What if our buildings could breathe? What if our cities could function not as concrete jungles, but as living ecosystems? What if we could merge cutting-edge technology with sustainable design to create urban spaces that enrich human life while healing the planet?" She gestured to the large screen behind her. It flickered to life not with charts and graphs, but with a breathtaking animation. It showed a reimagined downtown metropolis. Buildings covered in vertical gardens that cleaned the air, their facades embedded with transparent solar panels. Sleek, silent electric trams gliding along green-roofed corridors. Public squares designed for human connection with water reclamation features disguised as beautiful fountains. It was a vision that was both futuristic and deeply fundamentally human. "This is Aurasphere," she declared, her voice filled with passion. "It's not just a company, it's a new philosophy of development. We use proprietary AI to model and manage energy consumption in real time. Our building materials are carbon negative, synthesized from recycled composites. Our architectural designs prioritize natural light and communal well-being. We don't just build structures, we build habitats." The room was utterly captivated. This wasn't the usual dry talk of profit margins and zoning variances. This was a revolution. The Metropolis Downtown Revitalization Project is the most ambitious undertaking in this city's history, Elara went on. And Aurasphere, in partnership with the city and a consortium of forward-thinking investors, will be leading the way. Over the next 10 years, we will invest $10 billion to transform 16 square blocks of our city core into the most sustainable, technologically advanced urban zone in the world. A gasp went through the audience. $10 billion. The number hung in the air, heavy and immense. Julian's own bid for the primary contractorship had been a fraction of that, a proposal that now seemed laughably small and archaic. "This project will create over 15,000 new jobs," Elara added, her voice ringing with conviction. "It will set a new global standard for what a city can be, but more than that, it will be a testament to the power of a single idea. A testament that no dream is too big, no vision too bold, if it is pursued with relentless dedication." She looked out at the sea of faces, her gaze strong and unwavering. "There will always be those who tell you it can't be done. Those who prefer the comfort of the familiar to the challenge of the new. They will call you a dreamer. My advice, let them. And then go out and build the world they can't even imagine." She finished her speech with a simple, "Thank you." For a moment, there was stunned silence. Then the ballroom erupted. The applause was deafening, a spontaneous, explosive ovation that dwarfed the first. This wasn't just politeness. It was genuine, unadulterated awe. Mr. Harrison was shaking her hand vigorously, his face alight with excitement. City council members were already moving toward the stage. The formal part of the evening was over. The power dynamics of the entire city had just been redrawn in the space of 10 minutes, and Elara Vance was holding the pen. As she descended the stage, she was immediately swarmed, not by gossip columnists, but by the most powerful CEOs in the room. Men and women who an hour ago wouldn't have known her name were now desperately trying to get a moment of her time, thrusting their business cards at her. their faces alight with admiration and ambition. Miss Vance, an incredible vision. My logistics firm would be honored to consult. Miss Vance, the energy solutions you mentioned, we need to talk. Elara, if I may. Arthur Sterling has told me so much about you. A masterpiece of a presentation. She navigated the crowd with an effortless grace, engaging, listening, and connecting. She was in her element. Meanwhile, Julian's table had become a dead zone. The gravitational pull of the room had shifted entirely away from him. His friends Marcus and Liam were staring at him, their expressions a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Julian. That was your Elara, Marcus stammered, unable to reconcile the powerhouse on stage with the caricature Julian had painted. Julian didn't answer. He was watching her, watching the way these powerful men, his rivals, his peers, deferred to her. The way they looked at her with a respect he had always craved and often had to bully into existence. He felt a surge of something hot and venomous in his chest, a toxic cocktail of fury, jealousy, and profound crushing regret. Tiffany finally broke the spell. Julian, she said, her voice small and uncertain. Her company. Aura Sphere. Isn't that the name you were? She couldn't finish the sentence. The pieces were clicking into place for her, too. The joke wasn't on the ex-wife. The joke was on her date. The joke was on them. Julian slammed his fist on the table, making the glasses jump. It's a trick, he hissed, his voice low and ragged. Some rich fool is backing her. A fluke. It's a house of cards, and it will come crashing down. But even as he said the words, he didn't believe them. He had seen the look in her eyes. He had heard the conviction in her voice. This was no fluke. This was a reckoning. And it was just beginning. The crowd around Elara was a vortex of energy and opportunity. She moved through it with a poise that felt both natural and hard-won, delegating follow-up meetings to a sleek professional assistant who had appeared at her side and engaging in deep conversation with key players like the head of the city's Urban Planning Commission. Julian watched from his table, which now felt like a lonely, desolate island. Marcus and Liam had mumbled their excuses and scurried away, eager to distance themselves from his toxic fallout. Tiffany sat beside him in stunned silence, her earlier adoration replaced by a look of dawning disillusionment. She was looking at him, truly looking at him for the first time, and seeing not a king but a petty, bitter man who had just been publicly neutered. Rage, potent and blinding, finally overrode Julian's paralysis. He had to do something. He had to confront her, to reassert the old dynamic, to prove that he still had some power over her. He pushed his chair back so violently it nearly toppled over and began to stride across the ballroom floor. He intercepted her near the grand terrace, just as she was sharing a quiet, triumphant moment with Arthur Sterling. Elara, he said. The name came out as a harsh bark. Elara turned slowly. Her expression did not change. There was no surprise, no fear, no anger. There was only a calm, dispassionate neutrality that was more infuriating to Julian than any open hostility would have been. Arthur Sterling gave Julian a look of withering contempt before nodding to Elara and taking a discreet step back, though he remained close by. Julian, she replied, her voice even. I was wondering if you'd come over. His mind, reeling, seized on her words. She was expecting me. She thinks this is some game. What is this, Elara? He demanded, keeping his voice low, though it vibrated with suppressed fury. What kind of stunt are you pulling? Who put you up to this? Did you win the lottery? Find some senile old billionaire to bankroll your little fantasy project. He was reaching for the old weapons in his arsenal, belittling her, questioning her competence, attributing her success to a man. These were the tactics that had always worked, that had always made her shrink. But Elara didn't shrink. She stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. "There's no stunt, Julian," she said calmly. "And the only person who bankrolled Aura Sphere in the beginning was me, with every cent of the settlement you were so sure I'd waste on shopping. The rest I earned by convincing people who are far smarter than you that my fantasy is the future." The directness of the insult hit him like a slap. The old Elara would never have spoken to him that way. "You think you can just walk in here and take over my city?" He sneered, his composure cracking. "This is my territory. I built this city." A small, sad smile touched Elara's lips. "That's your problem, Julian. You always thought you owned everything and everyone. You don't build. You conquer. You acquire. You don't have a creative or visionary bone in your body. You just buy what other people have imagined. And you could never imagine this, could you?" Desperation began to creep into his voice. He switched tactics, trying to evoke a past that no longer existed. "Elara, think about what you're doing. We had history. We had a life together. You can't just erase that. This project, it's too big for you. You need help. You need me. Croft Enterprises can. We can partner. I can guide you, protect you from the sharks." It was an astonishing display of arrogance and delusion. He was offering to save the woman who had just secured a $10 billion project, a project that would directly compete with and likely obsolete his own company's endeavors. Elara actually laughed. It wasn't a loud or cruel laugh. It was a sound of genuine, incredulous amusement. It was the most devastating sound Julian had ever heard. "Protect me," she said, her laughter subsiding into a look of profound pity. "Julian, you were never my protector. You were my cage. The sharks you're talking about, I've been swimming with them for 2 years in Silicon Valley. They are bigger and hungrier than you could ever imagine. And I didn't just survive. I thrived. Because unlike you, I have something to offer them, other than bluster and a big bank account. I have a vision." She took a step closer, and for the first time he saw a flicker of the old pain in her eyes, refined not into weakness, but into an unbreakable strength. "The saddest part of all this, Julian, is that I once wanted to build this with you. I showed you those sketches, not as a hobby, but as an invitation to build a future together. And you laughed at me. You told me to design a garden shed." She shook her head, a final, quiet dismissal. "So I went and built my own world instead." She turned to leave. He reached out his hand, grabbing her arm. "Don't you walk away from me." Before she could even react, Arthur Sterling was there, his hand firmly closing around Julian's wrist. Despite his age, Arthur's grip was like iron. "I believe the lady is finished with this conversation, Mr. Croft." Arthur said, his voice dangerously low. "I suggest you remove your hand." Julian looked from Arthur's cold eyes to Elara's impassive face. He saw no purchase, no way back in. He was locked out completely. Defeated, he let his hand fall away. Elara didn't look back. She simply walked away with Arthur melting back into the crowd of her new allies and admirers, leaving Julian standing alone on the edge of the terrace, the cool night air feeling like ice on his feverish skin. The party buzzed on around him, but for Julian Croft, the music had stopped. He was a ghost at his own feast. His empire of steel and glass suddenly felt as fragile as a house of cards, and a wind he never saw coming had just begun to blow. The fallout from the Metropolis Gala was not a gradual decline. It was an avalanche. The next morning, the city's business journals and news outlets were dominated by a single story: the mysterious Ilara Vance and her $10 billion vision for downtown. Her face was on the cover of Metropolis Business Weekly. Aurasphere, a name unknown just 12 hours earlier, was the only thing anyone in the financial sector was talking about. For Julian Croft, the day began with a series of frantic phone calls. First, it was the head of the City Planning Commission, a man Julian had been golfing with for years. The tone was not friendly. "Julian, we are putting a hold on the zoning permits for your Tower East project. With the Aurasphere initiative, we have to reassess the entire downtown grid. Everything's under review." Under review was a death sentence. The delay would cost him millions. Next was his bank. A senior vice president whose children's private school tuition was indirectly paid by the interest from Julian's loans sounded nervous. Julian about that credit line for the waterfront acquisition. "The board is getting a little skittish about your firm's exposure downtown. With this new Aurasphere project, it changes the landscape. We need to see a revised risk assessment." The landscape hadn't just changed. A new continent had risen from the sea, and his own properties were now beachfront in a tsunami zone. The value of his existing downtown buildings, once the crown jewels of his portfolio, was suddenly uncertain. Who would want to lease space in a standard energy-guzzling glass box when a self-sustaining, eco-friendly marvel was being built next door? His own office at Croft Enterprises felt like a tomb. His employees avoided his gaze, whispering in corridors. The news of his public humiliation had spread like wildfire. The story of him mocking his ex-wife just moments before her triumphant reveal had become a piece of corporate folklore overnight, a cautionary tale about hubris. He was no longer a respected predator. He was a joke. The most painful blow, however, came from a place he hadn't anticipated. Tiffany, who had been silent and distant on the ride home from the gala, had packed her bags. Julian found her in the marble-floored foyer of his penthouse, standing beside 3 Louis Vuitton suitcases. "What is this?" he demanded. "I'm leaving Julian," she said, her voice devoid of its usual breathy affectation. It was flat and tired. "Leaving? Don't be ridiculous. Because of some party." "Because of Ilara." He scoffed. "She means nothing." Tiffany looked at him, and for the first time he saw not admiration in her eyes, but pity. "It has nothing to do with her, not really. It has to do with you. Last night, I saw who you really are. You weren't just wrong about her. You were cruel. You enjoyed tearing her down. And it makes me wonder how you talk about me when I'm not in the room." She shook her head, a single tear tracing a path through her perfect makeup. "I thought I was with a powerful man. But a truly powerful man doesn't need to diminish others to feel big. He just is. You're not powerful, Julian. You're just a bully who got found out." And with that, she walked out of his life, leaving behind an echo in the cavernous penthouse and a silence that was more damning than any accusation. While Julian's world was imploding, Ilara's was expanding at an exponential rate. The Aurasphere temporary headquarters, a leased floor in a modest midtown building, was buzzing with an energy that was the polar opposite of the funereal atmosphere at Croft Enterprises. The gala had been a coming-out party. Now the real work began. Elara was a whirlwind of focused activity. She led meetings with architects and engineers, her deep understanding of the technical details impressing the most seasoned professionals. She negotiated with supply chain partners, her questions sharp and insightful. She interviewed prospective new hires, looking not just for talent, but for people who shared her passion. She was not a remote, untouchable CEO. She was in the trenches, her sleeves rolled up, a styrofoam cup of coffee in hand, her mind firing on all cylinders. Her team adored her. They saw her vision, and they were drawn to her quiet, confident leadership. She didn't lead by fear, as Julian did. She led by inspiration. One afternoon, Arthur Sterling visited the office. He found Elara not in a corner office, but at a large communal table, sketching on a tablet with two of her lead designers. "I'm surprised you don't have a grander office," Arthur remarked, a twinkle in his eye. Elara looked up and smiled. "The grand office is out there," she said, gesturing toward the window and the city skyline. "This is just the workshop. Besides," she added, her expression turning more serious, "I spent too many years in a gilded cage. I prefer to be where the work is getting done." Arthur nodded, his expression proud. "I spoke to some of my contacts on the board of Sterling and Finch Bank," he said, lowering his voice. "They mentioned that Croft Enterprises is trying to renegotiate its credit lines. They're over-leveraged on their downtown assets. The market is pricing in the aura sphere effect. His empire is starting to unravel, Elara." Elara listened, her expression thoughtful. There was no hint of glee or triumph. She simply absorbed the information, processing it as another data point in a complex equation. "His business practices were always unsustainable," she said quietly. "He built on debt and ego. A foundation like that is bound to crack eventually." Her lack of vindictiveness surprised even Arthur. "You don't seem very happy about it." "Happy?" Elara mused, turning to look out the window again. "I'm not sad, Arthur, but I'm not happy either. My goal was never to destroy Julian. It was to build my own dream. His downfall is a side effect. It's the consequence of his own choices. My energy is better spent focusing on what's next, not on what's being left behind." Her gaze was fixed on the horizon, on the patch of old decaying warehouses and parking lots that would soon become the site of her first project. The site of the future. Julian Croft was already part of the past, a crumbling ruin in her rear-view mirror. 3 months passed. The city was electric with change. The name Aura Sphere was on everyone's lips. Demolition had begun on the downtown site, and the first sleek, futuristic renderings of the project were now public, fueling a frenzy of excitement and investment in adjacent neighborhoods. Elara Vance was no longer a mystery. She was a celebrated visionary, a frequent and articulate guest on financial news programs, and a symbol of a new kind of leadership. For Julian Croft, those same 3 months had been a slow, agonizing descent. He had managed to stop the bleeding at his company, but only just. He'd been forced to sell off 2 of his signature buildings, at a loss to cover his debts. His best executives, seeing the writing on the wall, had jumped ship, some even applying for jobs at Aura Sphere. He was a pariah at the social clubs he used to dominate. His presence met with awkward silence and averted gazes. The empire he had spent a lifetime building was now a shadow of its former self, teetering on the brink of insolvency. His last desperate hope was a small but potentially lucrative contract within the massive downtown revitalization project itself. The contract for sub-level infrastructure and foundation work. It was grunt work, a humiliating step down for a man who used to build the entire skyline. But it was the only thing that could save his company. It was his only lifeline. The day of the pitch meeting arrived. Julian walked into the Aurasphere headquarters, a building he had once dismissed as a fantasy, now the new center of power in the city. The space was bright, airy, and filled with plants and natural light. Young, energetic people bustled about, collaborating at open-concept desks. It felt less like a corporate office and more like the future. The contrast with his own stuffy mahogany-paneled office was a painful reminder of how far behind he had fallen. He was escorted into a large boardroom. At the head of the long, polished concrete table sat Elara. She was flanked by her executive team, a group of sharp, intelligent faces, including a few he recognized as former stars from rival firms. Arthur Sterling sat at her right hand, his expression unreadable. Elara looked at him. Her gaze was professional, almost impersonal. There was no animosity, but, more chillingly, there was no familiarity either. She looked at him as she would any other minor contractor. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice crisp and businesslike. "Thank you for coming in. You may begin when you're ready." Mr. Croft. Not Julian. The formality was a wall thick and impenetrable. Swallowing his pride, Julian launched into his presentation. He had worked on it for weeks, drilling his team relentlessly. It was a solid proposal, technically sound and competitively priced. He laid out his company's experience, their equipment, their manpower. He tried to project an aura of his old confidence, but his voice felt hollow in the bright, optimistic room. He was a man of the past, trying to sell his services to the architects of the future. When he finished, there was a polite silence. Elara looked at her chief engineer, a sharp woman named Dr. Anya Sharma. "Dr. Sharma, your thoughts?" Dr. Sharma tapped her stylus on her tablet. "The proposal is adequate, Mr. Croft," she said, her tone clinical. "It meets the baseline requirements. However, your proposed methods for material sourcing and waste management are outdated. They don't align with Aurasphere's zero-waste mandate. And your firm has no experience with the new carbon-negative concrete composites our foundations require." Another board member chimed in. "Furthermore, the financials of Croft Enterprises are a concern. This is a 5-year contract. We need a partner who is guaranteed to be solvent for the duration." Every word was a nail in his coffin. They were dissecting his company's weaknesses with surgical precision. Finally, all eyes turned to Elara. It was her decision. His entire professional life hung in the balance, and it was in the hands of the woman whose dreams he had tried to crush. He searched her face for any sign of emotion, for vengeful satisfaction, for a hint of pity for anything. He found nothing but cool, calm consideration. She looked directly at him. "Mr. Croft, we appreciate the work that went into this proposal, and we acknowledge the long history your company has in this city." He felt a flicker of hope. Was this her way of extending an olive branch? However, she continued, and the flicker died. Aurasphere is not just about building new structures. It's about building in a new way. Your company, your methods, your entire business philosophy, they represent the past. We are building the future. The two are simply not compatible. She paused, then delivered the final devastating verdict. "Therefore, we will be declining your bid. Thank you for your time." It was done. Not with a vindictive flourish, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet, professional, and utterly final rejection. It was a business decision, and that somehow was the cruelest cut of all. It meant their personal history had no bearing. It meant he was simply not good enough. Julian stood there for a moment, speechless. The air had been sucked from his lungs. He nodded, numbly gathered his papers with trembling hands, and walked out of the boardroom without another word. As he left the building, he paused on the sidewalk and looked up at the sky. In the distance, a crane, the first of many, swung its arm over the future site of Aurasphere. His city. But it wasn't his anymore. Later that evening, Elara stood on the balcony of her new apartment, which overlooked the project site. The city lights twinkled below her like a fallen constellation. Arthur Sterling stood beside her, a glass of wine in his hand. "That was a difficult thing you had to do today," he said gently. "It was a necessary thing," she corrected him, her voice soft. "It wasn't personal." "I know," he said. "That's what makes me so proud of you. The best revenge isn't seeing your enemy fall. It's rising so high that you can no longer see them." Elara looked out at the sprawling city, at the endless canvas of lights and shadows. She thought of the woman who had cried over a book of sketches, who had believed she was worthless because the man she loved told her she was. That woman seemed like a distant memory, a character from someone else's story. She had not set out to destroy Julian Croft. She had only set out to build Elara Vance. And in the quiet, triumphant peace of that moment, looking out at the future she was creating with her own 2 hands, she knew she had finally succeeded. The foundation she was laying was not just for a new city, but for a new life, built not on the rubble of her past, but on the solid ground of her own unshakable worth. Elara Vance's story is a powerful reminder that our value is not determined by the opinions of those who try to keep us small. It is forged in the fire of our own resilience and determination. She was told her dreams were worthless, a mere footnote in someone else's story. But she chose to pick up the pen and write her own epic novel. She teaches us that the most profound victory is not revenge, but resurrection. It's about building a future so bright that it completely eclipses the shadows of your past. Her success wasn't about tearing Julian down. It was about building herself up, and in doing so, she built a whole new world. If this story of triumph and transformation resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more real-life stories of overcoming adversity and achieving incredible success. What part of Elara's journey inspired you the most? Let us know in the comments below.